Just like that, we are back for our first panel session of the morning, day, evening. Again, the beauty of being a global community, people are spread out around the world. As I mentioned, I wanted to bring our good friends from Kickstart Global. I had the opportunity of meeting some of their colleagues last year over chat. We reached out and I was really fascinated by what they're doing. And we're going to kind of dive a little bit deeper into what they do, but more importantly, really focus on this dream team environment. How is it that university campuses all around the world are fertile and optimal environments to start ventures, as I mentioned earlier on? So without further ado, we'll maybe start off with a few quick introductions from Jhanvi and Bálint. So maybe Jhanvi, you can go first. You can share a little bit about yourself, what you're studying, where you're based, and then perhaps maybe share with you why you're really interested in student entrepreneurship.
Sounds good. So, hi everyone, my name is Jhanvi. I'm currently in my third year studying management at LSE. I am currently based in London, obviously what I'm studying. I'm originally from Stoke-on-Trent, which if anyone knows, it's between Birmingham and Manchester. A lot of people haven't heard of it. It's not much to know, to be honest. I joined Kickstart around June 2020 last year, originally as part of a logistics team in which I was the only member, but and then I went on to run the very first stage of our accelerator program, which was Team Formation, which for the first time lasted 1 month, became Team Formation Month from Team Formation Weekend, and was run entirely online, which was quite a new experience for me. And for me personally, I wasn't as into entrepreneurship when I joined, but now that I've been part of Kickstart for so long, I just love seeing how people grow on their journeys and seeing people pivot from one to the next, and being involved in that is something that I think I find the most interesting. And I'll hand over to Bálint now.
Yep, thank you. So I'm Bálint. I'm now director here at Kickstart, and also a talent scout at Entrepreneur First. Previously, I founded my own startup, and that was my first journey and a big learning experience on how things go. And yeah, I'm a second year student studying IT and management here at UCL in London. And why I'm interested in entrepreneurship, I think when I start thinking about this, I've always enjoyed kind of going from 0 to 1 and just that learning process of I have no idea what's going on to kind of, oh, maybe I'm starting to get it. And just that experience of nothing to something is really what I'm really passionate about.
Brilliant. No, love that. Thank you so much for those personal introductions. Now let's talk a little bit about what Kickstart Global does. Like, who are you? Why were you formed? What is the story behind that? Maybe Bálint, you can take us through that.
Sure. So Kickstart is a innovation hub that focuses on supporting student founders from day zero. Essentially, from our establishment in 2015, we were started by a couple LSE students, but the founding idea was to bring together talent from different campuses. And the idea of, say, LSE specifically is a university which specifically targets a kind of a niche set of courses, and kind of bring together the talent from different universities that allows for truly diverse founding teams. And then obviously at Kickstart, we run programs that support this finding journey and then the building journey from 0 to 1 and beyond.
No, love that. Now, Jhanvi, for you, of course, in your current role, alongside your degree, but you're also head of talent on there. And Bálint obviously touched on this notion of, cross-functional university talent, which I know is certainly something that was very rare in the environment, that you don't often see universities happy to collaborate, right? And kind of like, and say, hey, if you're at LSE, so which is London School of Economics, or if you're UCL, University College London, and you're at Oxford or Cambridge, let's all get together and obviously do stuff. Why do you think that is such an important thing in the university student entrepreneurship landscape? And what have been some of your learnings as both in your role as head of talent, but certainly maybe anecdotally, Kickstart Global wise?
So I think, like Bálint mentioned, why Kickstart was founded originally was around the idea of bringing people together and bringing those diverse perspectives. And one thing that we're trying to address in as much of a way as we can is the fact that London is not as much of an entrepreneurship hub as that you may find in America, and that's especially for students. And that's something that we want to address by bringing together students who are interested in similar ways. And what I've actually found personally being part of Kickstart is that, for example, Bálint goes to UCL, I go to LSE. Everyone who is coming to Kickstart who is interested in entrepreneurship is so open to meeting new people with new ideas. And I think one of my main learnings is they just don't have the opportunity. So each university has their own entrepreneurship societies and they will be running their own events. And those will be, even if they're open to everyone, they will mainly be students from that university attending. UCL will go to UCL events, King's will go to King's events, LSE will go to LSE events. So they're just not aware of the opportunities for collaboration between universities. And even the collaborations that happen are often a one-off. So, maybe the 4 main universities in London will do one-off collaboration events, but there isn't a continuous partnership between them, which is what we mentioned there. And what we're here to do is to sort of open up that opportunity to students and make them aware that there are people in other universities who have similar needs to them, and offering up people different skill sets from different universities. And personally, one thing that I found really interesting last year was because we did our entire program virtually, we were able to do it across the country. So one of our committee members was from Aberdeen. We had people joining from Warwick, up near Birmingham as well. We had one cohort member who was in Lithuania for the entirety of the program. And as far as I'm aware, he's still in Lithuania. So that kind of thing, bringing together people who have different impacts and different skill sets, and they may need each other and they're not aware of it. And one thing that was personally fulfilling for me was during team formation, there were track-out calls with each of the teams who had decided to form. And I had a track-out call with a solo founder who wasn't able to find anyone to work on his idea, which was around reducing food waste within London. And he really wanted to focus on this sort of like zero carbon waste, and that was his area of focus. And then the following team was looking for a technical co-founder, and they were missing someone with those technical skills, and I introduced those two. And now they developed a startup which found the lowest carbon way to it was like a low carbon reward system for people who chose the lowest carbon route for travel in flights.
Very, very apt, considering, in the UK and Glasgow in particular, exactly. It's been COP, and they've been talking a lot about reducing carbon waste. Now, you mentioned their team formation, right? And that was something that I remember speaking with Dana, really impressed me. And as we talk about this conversation of optimal teams, why are universities fertile grounds for team formations, especially around entrepreneurship? Maybe each one of you could kind of share like your views or your philosophies around it, whether anecdotally, what you've seen about why you think that is, that, universities are fertile grounds for entrepreneurship. So Jhanvi, maybe you can go first, and then Bálint, you can jump in.
So I think university students in general, whether it be undergraduate or postgraduate, they're very open to trying new opportunities, and they're much more, I'm just going to repeat myself and say open to new opportunities, and they have the flexibility in their time to commit to new things, whereas someone who may be working will rather have one concrete idea that they will follow through. Whereas for team formation, you need some people who are flexible in their ideas, because there may be one co-founder who has a strong idea and needs people with certain skill sets. And I think this flexibility in mindset is something that students have more, because they're not they're not set on one career path just yet. They have the opportunity to sort of explore what they're interested in. They may, some people go through several different ventures before they find what they like. Some people try entrepreneurship and they don't enjoy it. It's not for them, but they have the opportunity and the time during university. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, just how it makes sense in our lives of how, say, in my experience, when I went to university, I left my hometown, my home country, and came into this new environment where it was really exciting, and all of a sudden it felt like my own boss. And then essentially, when you go ahead and launch a startup, that's exactly the same situation. And obviously, it's a exciting city. I don't know, my previous hometown was 5 times smaller, and now and this is just kind of the population. When you look at how big the startup ecosystem is, then it just scales exponentially. And just meeting all of these really excited and ambitious people, that just gets you really excited about the whole thing. And also kind of university is sort of the place where it kind of filters out the really ambitious people. So say when I meet people from my course, I know that they are people who are really qualified and they were selected in here. So that kind of filters out a lot of people who may be less ambitious in starting the companies. And then just this environment is really exciting.
So that's actually a very important point. Like when we talk off, it's a privilege to go to universities. I mentioned in my opening remarks that, every university student gets an acceptance letter. So you apply to all these different places and then you get accepted. So there's certainly a selective process into the individuals that are in the room, that these people have applied, their application has been vetted, been approved. So if I'm sitting next to someone, then chances are they'll make potentially a good co-founder, which is great. I'm going to come to talent and opportunities right now, but before maybe I kind of talk about the talent versus opportunity question, I wanted to focus maybe on any downsides that you have observed on team formation in a student environment. Are there any sort of telltale signs you can share with our audience, or any tips and tricks you can kind of share around identifying potential co-founders for your venture? Jhanvi, why don't you start us off?
Mm-hmm. So from my experience, I talked quite a lot with the teams last year during team formation. And I think one of the most difficult things for teams throughout is when there was a mismatch in the sort of motivation that they had and the dedication they had to the venture. So there'd be some people who put 100%, and perhaps there's others that didn't have the same passion for that idea. And then you can feel it in another person that they don't have that passion. And when you do, it can be quite demotivating if not everyone is in it on the same way. Something that I think we noticed as a committee, which is maybe something I shouldn't say, but it's that generally we found that postgraduate students are more dedicated and will spend more time, whereas undergraduate students are more flexible and open to trying new ideas, which is probably just because they're there to try something new versus there are people there who have an idea and they want to pursue it. I think those are the main ones for me.
I mean, as Kickstart, I think our main job is to kind of create that environment for students to kind of make this matching and mixed matching part really seamless. And when you start committing to an idea with someone and you realize that this is not going to work out, it's sort of like breaking up a relationship. And often cases it can be even tighter relationship than as a partner, because you're just working with them day and night. And that's a really awkward situation to be in when you realize that this is not right, but you don't want to kind of realize the fact that you made the wrong decision. So our job is to create that environment where these breakups are encouraged, because realizing it early on and acting quick, that pays off a lot better than realizing it, say, 6 months down the line, when all of you have invested in a lot of time. And if you were honest with yourself and you were in that environment where it's, maybe this is not the right, I'll go ahead and talk to other people, that just, ends up with a lot better teams. On that note, also, it's really important for us to, I think previously, one of the cohorts was like that we've matched up as a committee. We went ahead, looked into the profiles of people and basically created the teams. And correct me if this is not right, Jhanvi, but what we figured is that this doesn't really work that way. And we cannot be the kind of like the gods who create the teams, because it's a strong relationship. And maybe in terms of expertise, we can match them up, but the personalities and kind of the commitments that they are willing to take, those are the important bits to a founding team, and you cannot really see that from a CV or even just talking to them once.
Yeah, definitely making about, I think, organic relationships, as they call it, and similar. I have a similar philosophy when it comes to kind of mentorship, where like organic mentorship relationships that are built over a period of time are a bit stronger because, of course, there's that certain connectivity you ultimately have. So I'm sure the same would apply to sort of team formation in a student environment. Now, let's dive into this question around talent and opportunity. So Jhanvi, you mentioned that and I think Bálint could echo this as well, that one of the things that drove Kickstart Global's establishment was looking across the pond and saying, hey, Stanford, Harvard, Berkeley, a lot of these universities out of the US you're hearing all the founders of the big tech companies have come from this. So almost student entrepreneurship, as we know it, is really flourishing in those environments. Yet, maybe in the UK or across Europe or APAC, Africa, LATAM, it isn't necessarily the case. Now, we all know this as the talent versus opportunity scenario. What can universities do better around the world to almost level the playing field, as it were, for opportunities for student entrepreneurship to really thrive and flourish in those environments? Because we kicked off by saying the selective process is being taken care of in terms of people apply, and now they're in there. What can universities really do to support the student entrepreneurs in there?
Well, I'd say first, partner with Kickstart.
That's always a good plug. That's good.
Yes, because essentially what we've seen is that one university alone outside of the US may not be enough to establish a well-defined environment for student entrepreneurship. It takes a lot more people, and it takes a wider network of knowledge. And I'd say these universities in the US, well, obviously compared to the UK, is a lot bigger startup scene, and it's a lot more developed startup culture. So what you have to do is kind of encourage collaboration between the universities. We've seen collaborations with, or at least talks with, a university from Nigeria. And you could see that they have that environment, but it's so detached from all the capital available in the world that you need this connection to kind of enable it to flourish.
Jhanvi, would you like to add to that?
Yeah.
I'm going to think to see if I can add anything further to that, but I think what Bálint said about partnering across universities, but promoting entrepreneurship in general. So Bálint talked about collaboration. We're seeing more and more entrepreneurship arms of the universities themselves, not just entrepreneurship societies growing. So we've personally been partnering with LSE Genera. There are multiple other entrepreneurship arms of different universities which are growing, and students are showing more interest in that, and perhaps putting more support into that and showing it as a viable option for students compared to traditional career paths would be a way to just sort of spread awareness of that aspect of life. Bálint's a major what's the word, advocator of not having to go into the traditional career path.
Yeah.
No, I definitely love that, and even just the notion of saying, the ecosystem is important, right? In this general, in any city, we always talk about, like, with our chapters, it's the ecosystem, right? The ecosystem is important. So do you have a funding network, whether it's venture capitals or angel networks or corporate venturing? Do you have the accelerators and the incubators and the co-working spaces? Are the government funding and government grants and government enterprise support organizations kind of there and really championing entrepreneurship in all its forms? So definitely the ecosystem as a whole plays a part in it. Now let's just kind of dive back into this point you touched on earlier on around like the team formations and lack of commitment. So Bálint, this one would be for you, in that And it actually ties in with a question that we've had coming from Victor around saying, do you have experience managing multiple businesses? How do you balance that? But one of the questions I'll take that and sort of add to it, which I had, is how can students better balance the commitments between, hey, I've got my studies, my parents have paid all this money, or I've got the scholarship, but I've got this idea for this app, and I found co-founders on campus or different campuses to help us build it. How do they go about balancing those commitments? Are there any tips or tricks that you have seen from the various cohorts you've run on how to balance well, as it were?
Essentially, we run Kickstart as our own startup, so we definitely have first-on experience in this. And I can tell in a lot of days it's not a lot of sleep. But one thing that I've experienced and look at it from this way is, what is the goal with university? Essentially, I want to learn. And what we've seen with Kickstart, or just launching my previous startup, is that it's a huge, huge learning opportunity. And if I look at it from that way, it doesn't necessarily make a difference whether I'm working on Kickstart today or doing a coursework for my university, because in both cases, I'm just learning about new things, and I'm both learning about new things that really interest me. So in that sense, it doesn't really make a difference for me. At the same time, the general view is university should come first. And essentially that is what allows me, that was the thing that allowed me to join Kickstart later on. So it definitely comes first. But if I look at the startups that I'm doing from a learning point of view, then I am happy to commit X hours to that besides doing my degree as well. And of course, I'd say time management is really important.
Very crucial, very crucial. Now that's an interesting point, and Jhanvi, I'll come to you on this, and on this notion of practical learning, right? Like, of course, you go to your university, you're doing your degree, you're sitting in the classroom, there's a lecturer or professor in front of you. A lot of it is very theoretical. Yeah, sure, if you're doing maybe MBA, they're using case studies to learn. But of course, in a startup environment, it's like real life. You're experiencing the highs and lows of doing it. So are there ways that we can kind of really mesh this hybrid approach, especially in a university environment, of saying, almost your professor advocating for you to set up a little startup business if you're a business marketing student? Of course, I know it may not apply for all educational degrees that are being done, but is there a way to kind of create that hybrid approach of learning, right? The practical and the theory, and how, again, they can kind of balance it out. So Jhanvi, maybe share some insights on that.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm quite fortunate in the sense of I'm doing a management degree, and coincidentally, some of the things that I learned in Kickstart I actually did after I learned about them. So I learned what a sprint was when I actually had to run one last summer, and then the following year I was taught this is what a sprint is, and I was like, wow, that seems familiar to me.
How apt. So you yes. Almost have experience in it already. Yeah.
Yes. But in terms of the hybrid working, I think what running a startup gives you will be much more practical skills. Like you said, university is theory, a startup is practical, and it does depend on what your degree is, but I think it's the person-to-person interaction that you learn. So it could be sending 1,000 emails to potential respondents for a problem validation survey. It could be talking to potential customers. It could be talking to mentors and learning from them what's actually useful. I think that person-to-person interaction is what it's something that I've developed a lot at Kickstart, is the networking aspect. Networking sounds very clinical to me because of the associations, but talking to people and learning from them is something that I think startups give you, and that something that you can apply backwards in your degree, whether that's learning from your fellow classmates or whether it's from going to more events in university and learning from them. Hybrid working, the topics may differ, but the skills that you learn are practical just across life. because you grow in confidence and you grow in your belief, in your self-efficacy, that you have the ability to complete tasks yourself. And that confidence will just translate across the rest of your life, even if it's not technically quantifiable.
No, love that. Bálint, you mentioned about, essentially running Kickstart Global is like running a startup for yourself. What have been some of the lessons you have learned, leading Kickstart Global? And essentially, I remember speaking to Dana about this, that for you all, you're running like a committee, so you're almost custodians for the time that you are a committee to the next steering committee that will come along and lead it. So how would you, like, what are some of the lessons that you have learned, and what would you like tie yourself differently now that you've been in that role for a while now?
Well, I think two things. One of the things that you started touching upon is how the whole committee changes really rapidly. This was something that really surprised me. I've only joined, I think, in February, so it's not been a long time. But since then, more than 50% of the committee changed. So it's a really kind of rapid environment where people are turning up. And actually, one of the first workshops I held internally was around kind of developing a mission for ourselves. And because you see a lot of people changing and they come with new ideas, and we're really encouraging those new ideas. But at the same time, if there is not a strong overarching vision, then that will just get messed up, and we're going like this year this way, then next year, and you'll just end up meandering. Whereas if there is kind of an overarching vision, that can lead into, that can lead things go further ahead. And I guess learning's been, I think learning's been that if we messed up something, one, it's all right. Two, we have to acknowledge it and quickly adapt it. So this is kind of an interesting, say we had an event earlier that we've launched, we were thinking about that is exciting. And soon we realized that, say, marketing was not necessarily the way we intended it, and it wasn't generating the kind of audience or the kind of impact that we were expecting. And then we realized this, took everything down, regrouped, and then we created the event, and seeing how this iteration on it just made a whole world of difference.
Really taking those startup principles around iteration and applying them for yourselves. Very, very smart. Jhanvi, what have been your favorite parts of being, part of Kickstart Global and being involved in this sort of student entrepreneurship movement?
Mm-hmm. So I think for me, it is, and it always will be, the people. So obviously working with the committee, I have to mention that now, but what else is, so throughout the acceleration program last year, how we worked it was that we would have the same mentor group. So we'd have 2 to 3 startups and 2 to 3 mentors for the entire time. So I got quite close with the startups that I was working with across the 6 months. And I think seeing them go from 0 to 1 and where they are now, and seeing that progression is something that I've personally found very interesting. And we adapt the program. We try as much as possible to adapt the program to our startups. And that's what we're looking to do this year as well, and trying to fit those needs as much as possible.
Mentorship is great. And I know Chris and Stephen, who will be coming on after this, will talk to us a lot about the impact of mentorship. Big fan of mentorship. I think it's definitely important. So just to ensure we've got enough time for questions here, I'm going to go through some of the questions that we've had come through from our audience in the Baby Vet platform. So Ishmael here kind of touches upon what was one of the main obstacles that you've come across along your startup journey. So maybe if I can add to this as well, Bálint, I know you mentioned, you had a sport tech startup. So maybe some of the lessons learned there. And maybe Jhanvi, you can add to that in terms of for the different cohorts that you've run. some of the mentoring sessions maybe that you've sat into, some of the lessons that you've heard of the obstacles they've experienced along their journey. So Bálint, why don't you start us first on your experience at your sport tech startup?
Well, one of the things is kind of that we've actually talked about a bit before is commitment, and kind of realizing what is the most important thing for you right now, and kind of acknowledging that this is not the right team right now, and being really transparent within the team about this. Because again, you can kind of half commit to something, but in my experience, I used to be a sailor in the national team for 4 years, and there you've really learned how you either do something or don't. There's not really a half way of doing it, because there's just a waste of your time. And kind of, I guess this kind of gives a hint of why we abandoned the startup. I mean, that just gives it half of the story. But the other one is when you conduct validation. I think we've just held a workshop about a week ago on problem validation. And when you come back from a problem validation, we're kind of, conducting interviews and all that, and you say, oh, we've validated everything and it just seems fine, that is a big red flag. Then you did something wrong. And kind of doing that right kind of takes a lot of lessons early on, and taking those lessons honestly and transparently without trying to introduce your own biases is really hard, but it's really crucial to your startup succeeding.
Jhanvi, anything you'd like to add to that?
I mean, I was going to say the whole thing about validation, because there's so many startups. I think Bálint phrased it much better than I could, but there's so many startups out there who will go through their validation, and even if they notice it doesn't complete, their solution doesn't completely fit what customers need, if they choose to go on with their original idea, it's not iterating, it's not taking into account what the market actually needs, and that's what contributes to a lot of problems later down the line. Even if in the moment they don't want to change their approach, it's much better to do it early on than later, when you're already committed much more intensely than you could be earlier in the process. And I know that one book that always gets recommended about problem validation is the mom test. I think during our program, I think I've heard about the mom test about at least 4 times in about 3 or 4 weeks from different people. So if anyone wants to avoid that problem, that's the book to read.
And kind of adding on to that, just a real sec, is that problem validation is not necessarily an obstacle in a sense that you face it or like you kind of see it and it's obvious. It's more of something that a lot of people get wrong. So it's an obstacle that you have to notice. So you'll have to look for it. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Let's talk about this piece around motivating teams when things look a little, bleak. What are some of the tips and tricks you've seen with the cohorts that you've run where teams are down, they're maybe not gelling, things are not working together? What have you seen has worked to really create these optimal teams to ensure that they flourish? Jhanvi, maybe you can share some of your insights as head of talent.
So initially, obviously it comes from the team itself, and it's very dependent on the team and their idea. So we had teams who were always at the very top, even in team formation itself, they had somehow secured some kind of funding. And then you have the teams who were struggling with their idea and they weren't getting where they wanted with problem validation. And I think one thing that everyone said to me after I talked to them at the end of the program was that Kickstart was good because it gives a structure compared to going through a startup by itself, by yourself, when you don't have this sort of milestones that we had in our program. And I think having that motivation is something that we tried as much to keep going, to have a goal plan of, maybe not every week, these are the things that you should have done, but like, at the end of one stage, this is where we expect you to be. And we also had, each team had a dedicated committee member. Like I mentioned before, I had 2 to 3, I had 2 startups. It went up to 3, it went down to 2 again. But I had three startups at one point, and one thing that I found was great was talking to them outside of the actual session itself to make sure that they knew to know what progress was happening and where they were struggling. So sometimes it was about having the conversations with the teams who weren't gelling with one another, and you could see that perhaps the co-founders didn't get along and it was time to break that team apart, or whether it was about they've hit a roadblock in their research and they need a new direction and they need more mentorship to know where they should go next. So it's about talking to them, finding out what their solution is. I don't know if there's a one-size-fits-all solution for that kind of problem, because it is obviously dependent on the team and what they're struggling with. But I think giving a sense of guidance is something that helps, regardless of where you're at.
Isn't a magic bullet, as they say. We've asked just for that book recommendation again, if you can just let us know who the author is, and then one of my colleagues will post it in the chat. If what was the name of the book?
It's The Mom Test.
The Mom Test, yeah.
Yes.
So The Mom Test, definitely recommend
Rob
it.
Fitzpatrick. Yep.
Very, very good one to recommend. The Mom Test. Maybe someone from the team can post that, a link to that on Amazon. Okay, we got a question here around sort of what metrics. So maybe you can all share, especially as a cohort with the different programs you run. They're very structured. So, but then you can maybe give us some insights around what are the different metrics you've looked at to evaluate how well an idea such as a marketing strategy works. So maybe you could kind of give us the insights of, with the mentorship that they are receiving in the cohorts. What are some of the different metrics that they're being advised to look at to validate their ideas?
Okay, so this is looking at individual startups or Kickstart as a whole?
I'll say if you can provide us both, that'll be excellent. That would be really good.
I mean, I think one of the ways that we've been evaluating ourselves as Kickstart is, well, mostly what we've seen as our value lies in our people, and not necessarily in how successful these first startups that became. Obviously, as you've mentioned in the first talk you've given, a lot of first-time founders get it right, and they end up doing huge corporations. But what we've seen is educating these young students and giving them this first sandbox opportunity where they can fail without any consequence. That is huge learning for them. And one of the metrics that we measure ourselves on is the people that we've impacted here, where do they end up working? And what we've seen is around 50% of the cohorts that go through Kickstart end up working in the kind of startup ecosystem. Either it's on the VC side or other accelerator programs, or just going into startups. And well, personally, I find this really important because it's kind of shifting from the norm of going into a big corporate. The other one, we definitely measure ourselves on how diverse we are, given the nature of we're geographically really diverse, but obviously introducing new metrics to measure our ethnic diversity as well. And I guess in terms of, say, how successful marketing goes, in Kickstart, we go around having ownership of one event. So say Jhanvi was actually doing Pine and Pitch, a series we collaborate. She's kind of a product owner of that. So whenever there's a question regarding Pine and Pitch, you can go to her, she'll know the answer. And whenever there's a new project, we set out new KPIs for that specific project. So we want to have X number of attendees. For that, we usually have to, reach Y number of students. And that just usually comes by case.
Brilliant. No, love that. Okay, time for just one last question here. And Jhanvi, this one's for you around networking, which is something that you mentioned earlier on. So Victor here asked, talking networking, how do you approach anxiety of meeting people, especially more older, accomplished ones, right? So, you go to a big conference like Startup Grind Global, and all these established entrepreneurs. How do you think students should navigate a space like that when they're meeting more established entrepreneurs, as it were, whilst they're still a student?
I think personally, networking can sound, to me, being an LSE student, it's very clinical and you have to meet all the big names. I think in reality, if you're looking to network, if you're interested in someone who's an experienced entrepreneur, you're interested in them for a reason. There is something that they've done or something that they've experienced that you want to learn more about. And I think anyone is happy to talk about themselves, and especially if it's something that they have passion for. If you approach them with the sense of not that, oh, I want to get X hours of mentorship from you, or I want this thing from you, more from the perspective of, oh, I heard about this experience that you had. Can you tell me more about it? I'd like to learn more from you. People, I think, will generally always be willing to talk and willing to help you out because they understand where you're coming from and they know what they went through themselves as an entrepreneur because they weren't always so experienced, and they're willing to help and they have the experience now. And perhaps back when they were a first-time founder, they wish they had that guidance as well. So it depends on the person, but generally, if there's something you're interested in, approach them and ask them about what it is you want to know.
And just in the startup ecosystem, I believe that there is a give first approach in the culture.
Startup grind values.
Yeah, and you just go ahead, talk to them, and they're willing to help you out. And then you can see what you can get out of it, and you can later see if it was beneficial for them. But you never know what you can get out of it.
Absolutely love that. Thank you so much to Jhanvi and Bálint. What wonderful insights. If you're interested, go check out Kickstart Global over at kickstartglobal.com. Very easy to remember that. Thank you so much for the wonderful insights. And remember, I think as we shared a lot, remember, entrepreneurship is a journey. Value the lesson. We've spoken a lot about mentorship, and we're excited to have our next session that will be starting shortly. So stay tuned. A massive thanks once again to Bálint, Jhanvi, and of course, our partners, VeriSign and Entrepreneur Organization, for sponsoring the Student Summit. We'll see you back shortly.